Hi class. Today I'd like to do just a quick recording of some slightly more advanced SketchUp skills, just to get you going a little bit farther on your custom designs for the lovely Endicott gull clippers. First of all, a couple of you have been erasing things, but doing it fairly slowly. So for example, some of these square columns, I said you can get rid of those, and you can click on a line and delete it. One thing you can try to do is get an angle at which you can see an object, but see it where you can kind of use one of the selection windows to capture all the elements. So for example, from this angle, I can draw a selection window around this whole column, but not get any of the wall, and then just hit delete. And that works pretty well. Another way that you can get rid of elements is using the eraser tool. And the eraser tool is an awful lot of fun. Because you just click and drag over things and they disappear. And remember, all you have to do is erase one line and you erase an entire face, because faces need full lines to be formed. Now, in this case, it's probably easier to just draw it using, or delete it using a window. Now, other things that you can do that we all love to do are things like painting. And but you might find that when you have a model, for example, this model, the windows are actually groups. Groups are kind of like components in that there are collections of different objects glued together for easy reference. So if I were to copy this, it would be just a whole group. The way you can be sure that it's a group is if you just double click on an object. You see how the rest of the model is greened out or grayed out? That's telling me that I'm actually editing a group. And you can keep double clicking on it. When I double click on it now, I get a face and bounding edges. So now I'm inside as much as I'm going to get. And here's where I can go and choose a different color. So for example, if I chose, I don't know, I could choose any sort of color, I suppose, but glass and mirrors is probably the most likely one. So here I'll paint it glass. To exit the model, the big thing is click outside of that box and you'll see the results. I certainly could click on the entire component. You do run the risk when you do that that you will paint other geometry. Now in the case of windows, it's actually fine to paint on the outside of them because there really isn't any frame geometry, so to speak of. However, if there had been mullions drawn in, then you'll want to be careful and paint those. Now, in this case, I think I do have some extra lines here, but anyway, in the meantime, for the ease of video, I will just paint those. So painting is awfully fun. Now, other things that you can do, for example, this pre-made component that I sent you of the existing columns and existing ductwork, hopefully all of you were able to import it. If you couldn't import it, don't forget, download that component onto your computer and then choose File, Import, and browse to find the component. And you don't even have to place it in the right position at first. You see how this component comes in with a kind of piece of flooring on it? I can grab this component by some endpoint. And again, I want you to start thinking about the geometric positioning of these objects, and usually grabbing it by some geometric location, endpoints or midpoints, are the way that you can move objects quite successfully. Now that I've grabbed it by this lower endpoint, I can move it into the corner by zooming in and grabbing the endpoint that forms the corner of the room, and I just click to place it. Now what's nice is I can double click on this component and now I'm inside the component editing it. And I can come in with my eraser tool, erase the edge and any other lines that are in there. And now, like magic, I have just my columns. Except I think I missed a line somewhere. Or maybe I have copies of it, I don't know. Anyway, so that's how you can edit the component. Now, to paint different parts of this object, don't forget you have to be inside the component. If I paint it outside this component, for example, let's just choose asphalt. I don't know, that's kind of a silly thing to paint it, but that's what I'll use. You see how it paints the whole thing. You absolutely don't want to do that because then it's hard to paint individual pieces. Instead, double click on the component. Now when you paint it, individual pieces are easier to paint. Sometimes if you get things from the internet, like form fonts, you'll find that it's actually quite difficult. You have to double click many times to get inside that component. All right, a few other things that you guys are probably going to want to do are things like walls. To do a wall, I'm just going to delete this component or move it out of the way maybe for right now, so that we have a little bit of space. And to draw a wall, a basic wall, is very easy. The simplest thing, and again, this is a sketchy program, so you don't need to be too precise. You can basically just draw a rectangle. Now, as I'm drawing, notice down here the dimensions, 20 feet, 1 3/4 inches by 1 foot 6. If I want that wall to be exactly some dimension, I can actually type it in. Now, I'm not moving and clicking or anything. I just initially drew that rectangle. All I have to do is type in 20 feet, and you do have to use the little single apostrophe, comma, 6 inches. And again, if you want inches, you have to type it. Hit enter, and now I have a wall that's 20 feet by 6 inches. Once again, when you draw that rectangle, just like when we were making copies of things, you have to do this dimensional change right away. Here I'll do it again, 10 feet, comma, 12 inches. You have to do it right away or else you will not be able to make a change. So now if I change my mind and say 8 feet, comma, 6 inches, it will make the change. But as soon as I invoke some other command, even if it's just the select command, I no longer have the measurements down there, so I'm unable to make the change. Anyway, with SketchUp, it's easy enough to draw, so if you missed your opportunity, just redraw it. Now, to make this into a wall, all you have to do is use the push-pull command. I just type in P for push-pull. Move your mouse over the surface you want to extrude. In this case, I want to extrude the wall part, and I'll just pull it up, and there we go. There's my wall. Now, this is kind of a half-height wall. Again, I do get a dimension, so if I wanted to type in 4 feet and enter, I can do it right away. Just don't invoke any other commands before making that change. Oh, and it looks like I have some extra lines here. Let me get rid of those lines. Oh, that line, though. Now you might say, well, what if I want that wall to go up to the ceiling? Well, here's the problem. In this view, I can't see the ceiling because the ceiling has been cut away by a section plane. I can only see it when I go inside the model. So now, inside the model, I should be able to use my push-pull tool and bring this wall up to my ceiling if I wanted to. Again, you have to invoke the push-pull tool, click on the surface you want to extrude, and it becomes attached to your mouse. Now the only trick is, you see how I can make reference to the ceiling by moving my mouse over some edge that I want to make reference to. If I click on that point, now I should have a wall that goes all the way up to the ceiling. Of course, there's little bits that are left over above these arches, but that's a separate problem. Now, let's say you've got a wall, but you just want it to be a slightly different wall. Maybe a wall that's at a funky angle. Of course, we all love doing funky angles. Well, what's cool about SketchUp is you can select pieces. And I'm just going to double-click on the top of this, and I'm going to click the Move command. So I just have the top selected. And now I'm going to make reference, give my base point on this wall, and move it sideways. And you see how now I can draw a wall that is at an angle. In fact, I can even move it using the other wall as an angle. Now this is quite unusual, but this could be a really interesting feature element. You might say, that's not funky enough for me. I want to do something entirely more wacky. I can even select an individual line and move that. And watch what happens. See how it extrudes out my... So if you want to do something even more unusual, say make an even more complex piece of geometry, what you can do, if you select nothing in this view. So I have used the select command and clicked off of all objects. So I'm just basically clicking on the ground. So now I have nothing selected. Now when I invoke the move command, watch what happens at my cursor. See how as I move over different objects, it selects those objects. Well, there's one type of object that we haven't talked about, and that is an endpoint. I can now select an endpoint and move just that. And now I can really create some pretty interesting and unusual geometry. So far, I've just been moving things in the same plane, but it is perfectly fine to try and move things in a vertical plane. Sometimes SketchUp will be unable to do that because it can't create the geometry that you want. But sometimes, for example, if I have nothing selected and I hit the move command, I can actually drag elements straight up and create some pretty weird looking elements. See how that's a pretty sculptural piece. Now, one thing I've been doing is I've been switching back and forth between these interior and exterior views. It's really important in SketchUp to have these saved views. It's very challenging to make these view changes in the middle of an edit. Anyway, if you like the object, and all of you are going to have to create something custom in your projects, my advice is, once you've got something that's roughly the shape you want, select all the elements in that object, if it's a reception desk or a countertop or whatever it is, right-click on it, and let's make it into a group. Okay? Groups are great for individual elements that show up in your project, but are not necessarily things that are repeated elements. If it is a repeated element, you would want to use a component. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about custom objects. For this, I'm going to go into a blank SketchUp drawing. It's just a little easier. By the way, Windows users, I don't believe you can have multiple windows open. Mac users, you can have multiple windows open. You just have, if you go to the Window pull-down menu, you'll see all open files here. Windows, I believe, that opens it up in entirely new files. If you just hold down the Alt command and hit Tab on Windows, you should be able to switch. On a Mac, it's Control-Tab to switch between windows of a program. So a couple of more complex geometry things that you can do. One of which is creating different kinds of polygons. Now, what we've done so far is we just have created some rectangles. Let's start by creating a circle. And first of all, one thing that you can do easily is push-pull. With this circle, you can create a custom kind of cylinder. Now, I'm going to use the select command and select just the outer ring of the circle. Whoops, missed it. And when I right-click on it, a little menu pops up, the context-sensitive menu, and I'm going to get the entity info. Now, entities are drawing elements in SketchUp, and if you want to find out information about them, it's kind of like the properties menu in AutoCAD. It gives you the radius. With some entities, you can actually change the number here, and I'm going to change this to 6 inches. Just type in 6 inches and enter, and look what happens. Lo and behold, I have a cone. And what's neat about SketchUp is certain objects, again, arcs and circles are probably the only ones that you can really do this with. It allows you to create a shape that is pretty interesting, and I can even move that shape and create something. I don't know what shape. What do you even call that shape? There are other polygons that you can use, or other shapes that you can use. One is called Polygon. If you click on Polygon, as you can see, a polygon is connected to my cursor, and as I start drawing, you see how it's making reference to some endpoint? Everything in SketchUp wants to be aligned, so often you can align things with each other by using these kind of smart cursor elements. Anyway, another general feature of SketchUp is that most tools, when you click on the tool, and I've clicked on the Polygon tool, have options. Down at the bottom here on the lower left, there are options which are available. Usually they have the politeness to tell us how to use those options. for the command. Now in this case, I'm on a Mac, so it's an Option and plus key. I believe on a PC it's Control and plus that changes the number of segments. Now down here it's telling you how many segments. Watch what happens when I hold down the Option key and click plus. See how the number of segments change? So if I wanted an octagon, for example, I just click it a couple of times and I can draw an octagon. Now let's say I want to make another one, and again I have to re-invoke the command in order to get these options to show up. But let's say I want fewer sides, I can click Option minus a couple of times, and now I'm creating a pentagon. Okay, now these objects are great because you can push-pull them, and once you've push-pulled them, you do have all those move commands that we've talked about. For example, if I wanted to move the top, usually I can let's try double-clicking on it. I can move it left or right, although this one doesn't seem to want to let me do that. Anyway, so that is a hexagon, or no, octagon, sorry. There are other tools, for example, the sketchy line tool. Now, it doesn't always work so great, but if you get the line to close, like I did here, I just finished at the same point that I can start, you can actually use the push-pull command to extrude it. Now, when you extrude it, you see how this is nice and smooth? There are actually facets to this. In fact, if we zoom in really close, you see how there are actually straight lines here. It's just that that's hidden geometry. It tends to smooth things, and smoothing in SketchUp means it hides lines. If you want to see those lines, just go to the View pull-down menu and choose Hide Geometry. What's interesting is that you can now push-pull these individual pieces. So you can create, again, some pretty wacky elements just by using these features. Okay, and of course you can always just draw good old rectangles and push-pull those to create objects. Now, what if I wanted to create a really simple table? Well, we typically will model things using kind of base shapes, kind of like when we drew perspectives. Now in this case, if I just want to create a block with a blocky top on it, I can draw a rectangle on the side of this, and again I'm just kind of eyeing things, and I can use my follow me command. Remember the follow me command? One of our favorite commands. Well, if you have the large tool set active, the follow me command is right here in the middle of the tool set. I can just click on this little piece that I've created, and I could move my mouse all the way around the edge, or I could hold down Command or Alt on a PC and move my mouse over the top and create for myself a nice little table. So SketchUp has some tools that allow you to modify what are called solid elements. Now let's say I've created a tube, and I'm going to turn it into a group here, just for ease of operating. And now I have my little table that I've created, and maybe I'll turn that into a group also. Now, I can move these guys around much more easily. I'm going to actually make a copy of this guy in case I want to make multiple bites. And I'm going to take a bite out of this table by just moving this tube over the table. Now, what's cool is there's a special category of tools called Solid Tools. And they're under the Tools menu. And if I use the Subtract option when I have something selected, SketchUp is going to prompt me, hey, what do you want to subtract from? It says select the second solid. See how as I mouse over this object, there's actually a 2 connected to my cursor. I just clicked on the second object, and like magic, I have an interesting bite taken out of my table. And again, if I have multiple ones that I want to modify, I would use copies of this tube. And again, I'll use my Solids tools and take a bite out of this table. So you can really create some interesting geometry pretty quickly. And that geometry, once you've got it, you can go on to further edit it. Sometimes it's a little bit hard, but for example, if I wanted to, move some piece or add some further extrusion, I could do that. You just have to be careful because SketchUp can't create impossible geometry. So for example, I can't finish this surface out with a line here because I can't see the facets in order to connect them. I'd have to come in and unhide the geometry to do that. So there are a lot of things that you can do, and there are a lot of things that you can't do. Here we go. Collect that piece. Oh, except I can't quite get that last little piece. Anyway, each of these individual pieces can be modified as well. All right, so there's my funky looking table with some pieces taken out of it. And again, using the tools that are available to you. Finally, the last thing that you can do is, let's say you wanted to create a table, but you wanted it to have, oh, I don't know, legs here. We'll make a couple of legs, and I'll just draw a small tube, maybe. Push, pull it up. How tall is a table? Probably 18 inches. And maybe I'll make it have a point at the bottom. So I'm going to select the bottom of this tube, and I'll get the entity info. Whoops, if I can do that. Just by right-clicking on it. And again, I can make it some really small number. A radius of, I don't know, 0.25 is a really small radius. Okay, and I can make the top taller if I wanted. Oh, and let me get rid of this hidden geometry. It's bugging me. So here is a table leg. Now, of course, I can select the table leg, right-click on it. Now, because it's a repeated element, I'm going to make it a component. And that's because, oops, let me get rid of this, leg, because I know I'm going to have more than one leg on this table. Now, we've learned in the past that you can use the move copy command and hit either Alt or Control on a PC and make a copy. But let's try something even more complicated. I'm going to select this leg, and I'm going to invoke the rotate command. Now, interesting enough, the rotate command, it gives you a little protractor. You click to give it a base point. And of course, down at the bottom of your screen, it is telling you, hey, pick a rotation point. It's also telling you, by the way, that if you hit Option, it will toggle copy on and off. So if I hit Option, see how I get a little plus sign? Unhit Option, or hit Option again, and it untoggles the copy point. I'm going to click once to give it that base point. I'm going to click again to orient the protractor. But then you see how I can move my mouse off to the side and it will make a copy. So it's just like the move copy command, except that it moves in a circle around whatever point I've clicked. So I'm going to make a second leg. Now what's really cool, first of all, if you look down here, I can change the angle. So if I knew some angle that I wanted, say, I don't know, 45 degrees, I can just type that number and enter. I can also type a number. 12, for example, times 12, and it will give me 12 copies of that leg, or like the move copy command, when it's activating an array, I can make that, I can keep changing my mind. So example 45, get a lot of copies, 22, get a lot of copies, or just, when you type in just the number, it gives you the angle. Let's go back to 30. And let's go back to times 12, okay, or times 8, so that we can see fewer. There we go. So now I have made myself what's called a circular array. Now what's nice about that is maybe that's what I want for the base of my table. Now that's an awful lot of legs for one table, but if I had some reason that I wanted to do that, I could certainly do that and push-pull myself up a tabletop. And maybe I'll push-pull this up a little bit like that. There we go. Nice big thick tabletop, and you can give it some funky laminate color or something like that. So anyway, when you create these custom objects, you can use all these different tools. There's the solid modeling, there's creating groups and components, there's modifying the entity info of different pieces, and finally, there are using things like rectangular and rotated arrays. Whatever it is that you use to create custom objects, you should, especially if it has multiple pieces like this, you should turn it into a component when you're all done. Again, just right-click on it and choose Make Component. For next class, we will be meeting at the site. I will be expecting you all to continue working on your models, and that you will be painting. You should have painted pretty much all the elements that you want to paint. You should also have laid out the space with the components you've collected from Form Fonts and 3D Warehouse. Finally, you should start work on some custom table or other element, and it can be anything, even the reception desk.